Demographic trends have been giving the housing market a boost for years as millennials hit their peak home buying age and boost demand for housing. Demographics is not everything when it comes to housing demand. Economics matter too. And there's risk that despite strong demographic trends, demand may fall off in the coming years. Today, we're going to look at what is happening with demand across the housing market, and I'll break down my top 10 and bottom 10 markets for demand growth over the next 5 years. Let's get into the data today about household formation. So how do we measure demand in the housing market in general? In the housing market, we just call it demand, and we measure it by mortgage purchase applications, basically how many people are applying to buy a new home, the total home sales volume, basically how many home sales are going every month. We look at the balance of supply and demand with things like inventory, months of supply, days on market. That's how we do it in the housing market. In the rental market, we often call it absorption, which is basically how many units are occupied, like how many total rental units are absorbed by the market. That's another way of measuring demand. When you think about real estate in general, at least I want to find a metric that measures both, sort of the demand for rental units, the demand for housing. The real thing that matters is the total number of quote unquote households in the United States and household formation, which is basically the growth in the total number of households. If you're wondering, what is a household, like obviously you know what an actual household is, but if you want to know what the data technical term of a household is, I pulled this from the census because this is sort of where you get the foundation of this data is, quote, a household or ordinary household in the sense of the census survey describes all of the persons sharing the same main residence without these persons necessarily being blood related. That is a very data nerdy term for basically just saying it is people who are living together in the same house. So like if you are living with your parents, that's a household. If you are living with a partner and maybe your children, that's a household. Even if you are living in a place with a roommate or multiple roommates, that is also a household. If you add up all of the households in the country, that should be the total demand for primary residences in the US. And this analysis and what I'm talking about today here doesn't count second homes or short-term rentals. This is basically just primary residences. That's what households is in reference to. That's what we need to measure if we want to understand the total demand in the housing market is households and household growth. And you should be wondering, how does that grow? Like, how does the total number of households grow? First is the most obvious, which is population, right? As more and more people reach a certain age, they're more likely to form their own household. But that doesn't automatically happen, right? Like you don't just turn 25 and all of a sudden move out from your parents' home or move out from having a roommate. It is more of a deliberate decision by an individual or group of individuals to actually form a household. You have to decide, I'm in a position right now where I want to move out of my parents' house, or I don't want to live with roommates anymore, or I'm going to move in with my partner, or whatever it is. Normally, this decision happens in their late 20s or early 30s. This is sort of like the peak of household formation in the United States. At least it really varies actually quite a lot by country when people form households, but in the US, it's usually late 20s, early 30s. When we look at the population in the US, we are having a big bump, a spike in population at just that age. And I've been talking about this for a few years now, but basically what's going on is our biggest population bracket, which is roughly millennials, but is really people from about 25 to 35 years old right now, is at peak household formation, right? If you look at this chart here, you can see the biggest bracket is people from 25 to 29 years old, with the second biggest bracket being from 30 to 34 years old. So we have a lot of population reaching that peak family formation, household formation years, and that has led to a lot of demand in the housing market just in terms of rentals and for home prices. As we talked about, demographics aren't everything when it comes to household formation. Even if the population is growing, households may not necessarily form, and vice versa, right? Even if the population is declining, households may still continue to form above average because economics also matter here, right? Just look and think about over the last couple of years. Inflation has been eating into spending power for people for the last several years. We've also seen home prices go up dramatically, rent prices go up dramatically, and we are living with a great deal of economic uncertainty right now. And so you have to think about, will people be forming households? Because they're not going to make a financial leap to form a household unless their financial situation supports it, right? When people are feeling good about their income, about their economic potential, they might be willing to go form a household because generally it's more expensive than living with roommates or living with family. But if people don't feel secure financially, they are probably less likely to form a household. That's sort of the context for what we're going to talk about, but I want to actually jump into the data and show you what has been happening with household formation. If you look at this chart, this comes from CoStar, you can see that pre-pandemic, the average household growth was about 1% per year pre-pandemic. It actually went up a bit in 2019 and spiked a little bit. But you could see actually in 2020, it nosedived down to zero. And actually for 2 consecutive quarters was negative, which is very, very rare given the population trends, because a lot of people based on population do want to form households. But obviously the economic and the just basically all the, stuff that was going on with pandemic made it really almost impossible to form household formation. And so it actually went negative. We saw consolidation of households. Then when things started to open back up in the economy, it absolutely shot up, peaked at about 1.2%, but has been coming down since. The chart that I just showed, which is year-over-year growth, does look dramatic, and it looks like now there's no household formation, but that's not true. I just want to show you the actual data here. So that was year over year, but this is the total number of households. And you can see that is still expected to grow up. So everything that is in orange here is a forecast. It's not actual. This is a prediction by CoStar. Everything in blue actually happened. And so you can see what happened here in 2020. It actually declined a little bit, but it has really started to go up and is expected to continue to go up just at a slightly slower pace on a national basis. Overall, household formation still looks good, but I will say this, CoStar's forecast, and I'm going to go back to this year-over-year growth chart here. CoStar's forecast shows that they expect year-over-year growth to settle in somewhere around 0.7%, 0.6%, and stay stable for the next few years. Personally, I think that there is more downside risk in the short term. So I think that given the economic climate and given all the household growth we've seen over the last few years, I think there's a decent chance, not saying this is going to happen, I just think there's a decent chance that we actually see household growth slow even more over the next quarter or two. But I think their general sense of where it's going to average over the next 5 years is probably about right. I just think there's more downside risk in the short term. But of course, this is all national data. And if you're thinking about investing, I recommend that you look at this data, household formation, population growth, in your area. But I wanted to provide you with some data about the top best, highest demand growth and lowest demand growth cities in the US over the next couple of years. So I picked big cities, so anything that has 100,000 households or more. And you can see here my list of the top 10 large markets for demand growth over the next couple of years. So number 1 is Provo, Utah, which has grown 4.3% on average per year over the last few years, which is crazy, but is expected to grow over 2% per year over the next 5 years, which is a lot of growth. So it's slowing down, but it's still really high. Same thing with Austin, Texas. To round out our list, we have Lakeland, Florida, Boise, Idaho, Ogden, Utah, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, Houston, Texas, Orlando, Florida, Charlotte, North Carolina, and Dallas, Fort Worth. All are expected to see really strong demand growth. Now, when we go to the other side of the equation, you can see that some markets are actually expected to contract. And from an economic perspective, that is not good. You do not want to see a declining population and declining demand. And the 10 markets that we see as the worst are, number 1 is Charleston, West Virginia. It is on average declined by 1.5% per year for the last 5 years, and is expected to nearly continue declining more than 1% per year. After that, it does fall off a little bit, with Flint, Michigan being the second lowest demand, with it's still declining. It has grown 0.2% over the last few years, but it is forecasted to decline 0.5% per year for the next 5 years. We also have Youngstown, Ohio, Erie, Pennsylvania, Binghamton, New York, Rockford and Peoria, Illinois, Huntington, West Virginia, Canton, Ohio, and Utica, New York, as a bunch of other markets that are expected to see negative demand growth. Now, I can't share with you every single city, so I do recommend you look for this on your own. You should be able to Google household formation in your area. The census has really good data about this, but hopefully this gives you a good idea. This video, my intention here is to help you understand what household formation is, what the implications are for the housing market and the rental market, which hopefully you understand is like the less people who want have demand for housing and rents, that puts downward pressure on prices. If you have really strong household growth, that puts upward pressure on prices just because simple supply and demand. When demand grows, if supply stays constant, prices go up. And so this is a really important consideration. You also want to look at supply in relative to this, which is another video that I'll do. But even if supply is, demand is growing, like in a city like Austin, if supply is growing faster, like the number of units that come on, that can also complicate your analysis. But if you want to understand just like where people are going to have strong demand for housing, I highly recommend you check out household formation in your local area. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have any questions or thoughts about this video, hit me up on Instagram where I'm at The Data Deli. I appreciate you all watching, and I'll see you next time.